Very pleasant good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Magandang umaga po, magandang tanghali, magandang hapon, at magandang gabi. Wherever you're located and whatever your time zone is, this is Rita Gadi, and this is your hour. The title of our program, as you will read it, Closing Without Closure. I will explain this as we, go along. But first, I'd like to inform all of those who have been watching us, who have been listening to us, who have been sharing our program, and those who have also acknowledged their appreciation for the things that we have discussed. We have been going on for the past close to 4 years now. And this is every Tuesday for 1 hour, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. But you could watch this also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. In fact, it is YouTube that contains practically all of the episodes that we have had from the very start. What is the meaning of closing without closure? Well, this is our last episode. I am closing the program of the Rita Gadi Hour as of this day, August 23rd, 2022, as a typhoon rages in the northern part of our country. What a name, Florita. It has the end name of this hour. At any rate, the reason for this is because we have practically touched on every aspect of the regime of President Ferdinand E. Marcos, his First Lady, Madam Imelda Romualdez Marcos, from 1965 until 1986, and then from 1986 until the present, after the administration of President Marcos. We began in 1965 because that was, as I've said, every time I make a program and every time I talk about events that have happened in the past, I always say that this is something that I have observed, something that I participated in, something where I have the documents to substantiate what I'm saying, because that is what's important. We have to speak the truth. We have to tell the truth. We have to be based on the facts as they are in existence. So, if I say that we began our Rita Gadi Hour from 1965, that was the time that I first met the couple, Imelda Romualdez Marcos and President Ferdinand Edralin Marcos. In fact, it was the First Lady, Mrs. Marcos, that I met first. I must have mentioned this already in one of my episodes. They were having the national convention for the Nacionalista Party in the Manila Hotel for the voting for the candidates that they will choose as their standard bearer for the presidency of our republic. Already they have lined up several big names, Puyat, Pelaez, Lopez, Tolentino, and then President Marcos, who was from the Liberal Party, joined the Nacionalista Party, took his oath with the Nacionalista Party because he was not considered as the standard bearer of the Liberal Party. He thought that President Macapagal would be endorsing him and supporting him. But instead, the incumbent President Macapagal decided to run for re-election. But it was already within the timeline of President Marcos that he would be running for the presidency. He was then at the time the Senate President. So he had to join the Nacionalista Party and cast his luck, so to speak, with the convention, where they would be choosing the candidates that one candidate for the presidency that the Nationalista Party will be supporting. So that was the time that I met Mrs. Marcos. My father was the chairman of the Nationalista Party in Cotabato. Cotabato province was then the undivided province, the biggest province in the country, as a matter of fact. It is now 5 provinces. And my father had, being chairman, he had 10 delegates with him. So Mrs. Marcos came to our family home in Tomas Morato. That's what they call the house on the hill. And she wanted to talk to my father to request that the 10 votes coming from from Cotabato rather, would be for Senate President Marcos during the convention. It took a while for my father to come down because he was already committed to the candidacy of Gil Puyat. Remember, at the time it was Amang Rodriguez, the grand old man of the Nationalista Party, who actually talked to my father for the convention. And my father already committed his 10 delegates for Gil Puyat. But Mrs. Marcos waited patiently over an hour, close to 2 hours. So my father had no choice. He had to come down and meet with her. But while she was waiting rather, she already had a long story about Senate President Marcos at the time, his outstanding record as a lawyer, as a congressman, and then as Senate President. She had a story about their courtship. When you sit with her for about 2 hours, then you can have the life story practically of both of them. So then she asked me what I was doing at the time. So I said, I will be taking up my postgraduate studies, but I could not vote yet at the time because I was only 17, 18, and the voting age was 21. It was President Marcos who brought it down to 18. But at the time, 1965, you had to be 21 years old to vote. So, but nonetheless, she kept on talking about President Marcos being the best that we could choose for the presidency. And so it was that after close to 2 hours, my father had to go down to meet with her. And believe me, in less than 10 minutes, she got not just the vote of my father, but the 10 votes. So that was why I first met her at the time. And so my father joined the campaign of 1965. And whenever possible, I would tag on with him. And as I've said earlier in one of my episodes, I had the map of the Philippines and I traced the different provinces that we went to for the campaign of Senate President Marcos at the time. And I wrote down the names of the politicians that he met with. And as I've mentioned before, you'll be surprised to know that even those names are still present today. Their sons or their grandsons or relatives coming from all of those provinces that we had in the campaign trail. That was 1965. So when I speak about my having known Ferdinand Edralin Marcos and Mrs. Marcos, it began at the time. But I did not cover Malacanang, as many of you know for television, immediately, because I was still in my studies. I got married, and then afterwards, I transferred from Manila to Katipunan and stayed there for a couple of years. So that was how it was as far as my life was concerned. There was a big storm in Cotabato City, a tsunami, as a matter of fact. So we went there for the assistance we could give. That was the time President Marcos also went there together with Mrs. Marcos, and we met again. And then that was the time he asked my father what I was doing in Katipunan, and my father said, well, she's acting mayor now because my mother then was indisposed. So then it was after Cotabato, when I came to Manila already, I enrolled at the Philippine Center for Advanced Studies while I was also working with Francisco Sionil Jose at Solidaridad. prior to that, I already worked with him in college when we were at the Benipayo Press, the mezzanine of the Benipayo Press on JP Laurel Street. But anyway, it's a long story as far as Solidaridad is concerned. That is my second home, as a matter of fact. And Mr. Jose has been able to set up not just Comment Magazine, but Solidarity Magazine, Solidaridad Publishing House, the Solidaridad Galleries, which is in front of the Church of Malate. So I was there to college, and then shortly after I came back from Cotabato, I worked with him again. But at the same time, I was also enrolled at the Philippine Center for Advanced Studies at the University of the Philippines, hopefully to finish my postgraduate in anthropology and also Islamic studies under Dean Cesar Mahul. And that was how Mrs. Carmen Guerrero Nakpiltita Chitang requested that I help out with the editing of the papers of scientists that came here for the International Conference on the Survival of Humankind at the Philippine International Convention Center. So that was it. I had an office at the PICC, and she wanted me to translate in layman's language all of those scientific papers so that they could be distributed as handouts. So you have this thick, voluminous documents, which I had to edit for just about one page. But at any rate, what happened was the broadcaster that was covering the office of the president, the late Vera Perfecto, died of a heart attack. And the International Monetary Fund was also already at bay. And so it was President Marcos who said that he saw me interviewing the scientists, and he said maybe they could get me also to cover the International Monetary Fund World Bank Conference, the first time it was held here. And that is the reason why the PICC also was constructed. So that was what happened, as I said, when the broadcaster from Malacanang died suddenly after the IMF and World Bank. The National Media Production Center, which was still housed at the Intramuros building, an old quaint building in Intramuros, they gave me a contract, some kind of a talent contract, to cover the office of the president. So again, as I've said, I had that opportunity to be with the president and the first lady. And the first lady, because of her travels abroad, I was also assigned to do the coverage then. So my work then in Malacanang was not a spokesperson. No, I was there simply to annotate live events or the events that the president attended. Like, for instance, he would be at the anniversary of the BIR or the anniversary of the Armed Forces, or some kind of an event where he would be the guest of honor, or sometimes the inauguration, like, for instance, the inauguration of the dam in Cagayan all the way up north. So I would cover all of this, or the PMA graduation in Baguio City. So I would cover this live on the Maharlika Broadcasting System of Channel 4, the government television channel. And I would annotate perhaps 5 minutes before the event to tell the history of what it's all about, and then annotate the event itself, and then close. That was just about it. In other words, I did not, I was not a reporter or a spokesperson. But they also assigned me to the first talk show, as a matter of fact, Face the Nation, which was produced by the late Ron Reyes for Channel 4. And so he got me to moderate that Face the Nation. And our first guest was President Marcos. And we had as a panel the editors of the newspapers, the dailies that we had, at the broadsheets that we had at the time. So when I speak, for instance, of the events, or as much knowledge as I would have regarding the administration of President Marcos during the time, then this is because of firsthand knowledge, that I have seen how he has, I have listened to his speeches. I've seen how he has inaugurated several projects and programs, how he has dealt with members of the cabinet when there are cabinet meetings, and several other episodes of the daily life of the presidency that I was witness to. I kept a diary, so many of those events are actually written down. Not all of them were part of my reportage every time I would have a live coverage, But I kept note of all of this so that in the event that there would be need for me to go back to these sources, I would know that on this particular date, this is what the president said. So I took down quite religiously many of his statements every time I had an opportunity to do so. I also had the chance to interview some cabinet members if it was necessary for the event itself. For instance, they were talking about electricity, so I would be interviewing the Secretary of Energy. If they talked about local governments, then I would be interviewing Secretary Ronyo. If it was foreign affairs, then it was then at the time Secretary Carlos P. Minister, as they were called, Minister Romulo. I also saw the transition from our presidential form of government to a parliamentary, because it was by decree that President Marcos created, or had by law create, the interim. First it was the interim Batasang Pambansa preparatory to the regular parliament. So we already had, even at the time, the parliamentary system. I had to do a lot of research regarding this. And of course, with the structure of the Batasang Pambansa out there in Quezon City, then I had to be able to cover likewise the sessions whenever they were held with the president or with Mrs. Marcos. But then again, as I've said, other than the fact that I was covering what was happening here domestically, when Mrs. Marcos would travel, when she was sent on diplomatic missions overseas, I was also requested to do the coverage of these events. And one of the first, as I've said, was the first time she spoke before the General Assembly of the United Nations. And that was how crucial the events that I was covering, because these are actually big events. Like, for instance, the first time that we went to the People's Republic of China and to the Soviet Union, this, of course, needed a lot of background, because there is very little at the time that we actually knew as far as the ending of the Cultural Revolution of Chairman Mao Zedong, and of course the leadership that they had at the time. So these were really what you could call the breakthroughs of our diplomatic relations with these countries. You must also understand that at the time, we had the two biggest American bases here. We're allies with America. We had the Mutual Defense Treaty with America. America was our big brother. And then the world at the time, because it was known as the Cold War after the Second World War, that the world was diametrically divided between the forces, the countries that were aligned with the United States of America, or the democratic countries, and then those that were aligned with the communist countries. At the time, you had the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, the USSR, which was the dominant communist hegemon, if you would call it already a hegemon at the time. The People's Republic of China was just at the beginning stage of its development after the Cultural Revolution. So it took quite several years before you had the opening of business, economics, and industries, etc., and all of that during the period of after Chairman Mao. Then you had Zhou Enlai, and then you had Deng Xiaoping, and the rest of the other presidents and prime ministers of China. So it was really just the USSR, if you could call it, versus America, just the way it was with the surrogate war in Vietnam. So those were exciting times. Excuse me. Excuse me. And doing the coverage for Mrs. Marcos, who was sent for these diplomatic missions, was really quite an adventure in a sense, because then you were entering countries which were supposed to be hostile as far as the democratic countries were concerned. But what a wonderful experience it was that you could come in contact with a different ideology, a different political system, and be able to talk about this and report on this, and most especially to annotate exactly how Mrs. Marcos handled those first visits. And then afterwards, you had the state visits of President Marcos to these countries and the opening of our diplomatic relations. So whenever I speak of those episodes, as I have done in the past 4 years, that is exactly what I keep on emphasizing. I was there. I met these people, these heads of state that our own president has met with, and our own first lady. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of their officials and to the cabinet members who were also joining such diplomatic missions. So it was that over the past 4 years of the Rita Gadi Hour, you were fed all of these little snippets, as you would say, of those instances when we had a breakthrough in many ways, not only for diplomatic relations, but also for big projects, for programs that were instituted during the time of the Marcoses, such as the inauguration of the Philippine Heart Center, the Kidney Center, the Lung Center, the Children's Hospital, etc., and so many others. And so it was that now that we have practically touched on just about everything that happened in the 20 years of President Marcos and Mrs. Marcos, we have come now to the end game of that particular era, which was 1986. I've also discussed this in my programs, episodes about what happened in Malacanang. I think you will see this also in this movie of Miss Aimee, Senator Aimee Marcos, the Maid in Malacanang. But other than that, there were also other episodes that I discussed exactly how it was in that particular period where you had the opposition rising up with so many rallies and so many other activities on the streets and everywhere, the opposition that kept on criticizing President Marcos until 1986. And the little that I perhaps participated in insofar as the political changes, I also discussed this in many of my episodes, like the coverage I had at the parliament, the Batasang Pambansa, which is traditionally the presidential electoral tribunal for the declaration of who won the presidency. So that was one of the last coverages I had at the Batasan, which was the proclamation of President Ferdinand E. Marcos as the winner of the snap elections of 1986. Shortly thereafter, that was in February 7 onwards. And then by February 22, we had the 5 days of February until President Marcos and his family were taken out of Malacanang. So again, as I've said, what were the events that I witnessed at the time? Well, many things that happened inside Malacanang as the end days were actually happening. And then afterwards, we had immediately the action taken by the assumption, although they would call it just a de facto, of Mrs. Corazon Aquino, while President Marcos was brought to Guam and then eventually to Honolulu for what we could call their years of exile. So firsthand knowledge that I had at the time was firsthand experience. I also mentioned this in many of my episodes, how those associated with the Marcoses were treated by the new administration. So in addition to what they did to me, for instance, in the college where I was finishing my law, where some assistant instructors wanted me expelled 5 days before my finals in the 4th year college. So you can imagine how it was, the harassment that was done then. Nonetheless, we were able to take the final exams and graduate and march in the graduation, and given the certificate of having been a graduate of the Sambeda College of Law. But then, of course, the aftermath was something which was, well, quite painful, if I might say. So my application for the bar was not accepted by one of the members of the Supreme Court, who considered that I might, it's not even definite, I might be included in the cases against the Marcoses for ill-gotten wealth. But the sad part about it is I could not even complete the mortgage of my own house with the GSIS. And so it was foreclosed even. I lost my house. Although they did not give me a chance to do some restructuring, but then it was almost close to impossible because I lost all my jobs. When I say all my jobs, I had other consultancies other than the contract I had with the National Media Production Center. So this was in order to stretch the logistics to support my children in school, LaSalle and Assumption. So I had to have consultancies from the University of Life, from the Metro Manila Commission, from the Development Academy of the Philippines, from the DBP even, the Office of the Chairman. So Mr. Season there accepted me also to do some consultancy. So I needed all of those extra consultancies to be able to stretch the income for the support of the family. But nonetheless, in many episodes that I have also mentioned, I was able to discuss the two major issues that surfaced after President Marcos left and as he was in Honolulu. The two issues which were almost daily written about, talked about, shown on television and so forth. And these were the human rights violation allegedly during the regime of President Marcos, the ostentatious lifestyle of Mrs. Marcos, the alleged stolen wealth of President Marcos, wealth that he has stolen from the Filipino people. Those were the allegations that were bandied about quite virulently all those first years after the Marcoses had left. So you had that all throughout from 1986 continuously until the present even. And all of this, I've already handled talking about them directly on my program several times. As a matter of fact, with the human rights case, because I also have those documents of the cases that were filed originally only by 4 claimants, and then eventually they said something like 10,000 other victims, although I've also mentioned that as far as court records are concerned, they were only able to submit 3,840 names. So that is all that is there as far as the judgment of Judge Manuel Real of Honolulu and Los Angeles is concerned. But nonetheless, I considered the treatment of this based on documents and based on testimonies and based on the records that we have a copy of as far as that particular issue is concerned. And I have emphasized this, as I will emphasize it again now. You must have repeatedly heard me saying this. Those are not cases of human rights violations. Those are cases for damages, claims for damages, as civil cases, not criminal cases. Otherwise, according to the law of America itself and international law, human rights violations as criminal cases should be tried in the country of origin, except when the administration in that country is hostile. But then you know very well that that was the time of Mrs. Aquino, so it is not hostile. It is hostile to the Marcoses, but nonetheless, those claimants are not considered hostile to the administration of Mrs. Aquino. But still, they did not allow President Marcos to return to the Philippines to face his accusers for that particular case, which is not even a criminal case, which is simply a claim for damages. Nasaktan, nasagasaan, o kung ano man yung nabugbog, pinatay, pero hindi na kailangan ipakita yung nangyari, basta bayaran na lang. So a claim for damages, civil cases, that was the human rights cases. Hanggang ngayon, yan pa rin ang pinag-uusapan. And I think the government of Noynoy Aquino already passed a law even that from the national budget or for some allocation, a certain amount was set aside to pay for some of those human rights claimants. Whatever it is, that is still a big issue up to now, as far as the opposition against the Marcoses are concerned. And then you had the again, the alleged stolen wealth. And I have also talked about this endlessly because, as I've said, based on first-hand knowledge and based on documents and based on being there as a participant of the trial in New York City, then I have said quite clearly that there is not one single document nor one single witness that is able to come out with any proof or any evidence that there was a single cent or a single dollar or a single peso that was stolen from the Filipino people, which is taken out from the national treasury. So yan talagang katakot-takot na habang explanation at kwento ang ginawa natin, etc. Then of course the role of the Americans as far as taking President Marcos and his family out of the country. You had the book of George Shultz, which I quoted quite extensively. And of course, many other publications and interviews that have come out already on print, and the statements of members of Congress, United States Congress, that came up with accusations, but which were later on invalidated precisely because their own office. I cited, for example, Stephen Sollarz, who kept on saying that Marcos even stole the money of American aid to the Philippines when, after investigation, their own General Accounting Office certified that there not a single cent actually was taken out of the allocation that should have gone to where it should go, the projects and the programs. So, but that was never published and nobody ever talked about it. They just kept quiet about it. So you had Stephen Sollarz lambasting President Marcos in the halls of the United States Congress. But when the auditing came out that it is not true, everything he said was not true, none of that came out or was published. And then I talked about it because I have a copy of the General Accounting Office, which clearly stated that there was not a single cent that President Marcos used for personal reasons. And the aid given by America went to the programs and the projects concerned. The same thing happened with the accusation that President Marcos also got kickbacks from the Japanese firms and the Japanese corporations that were doing infrastructure for us. You know, so Sumitomo, Kawasaki, we were buying all of this heavy equipment. And again, you had the Japanese Diet that did the investigation of this, and they came out, at least they published it in Japan, front page, and they did several stories that it is not true that there was kickback or some rebate given to President Marcos. And as I've said, it is not only the fact that we have copies of this, but when the Japanese officials of these corporations and these businesses went to Hawaii to apologize to President Marcos for what came out as a false accusation, I was there. So as I said, things that I've witnessed and events that I've seen are the events I've talked about. Again, all of this on the Rita Gadi Hour. So I'm summarizing many of those episodes that happened after 1986. Plus, of course, one of the most anomalous of this, the Presidential Commission on Good Government, which was the first law that Mrs. Aquino created. And with a statement in the opening line that President Marcos amassed the wealth of the Filipino people. Marcos, his associates, his relatives, his family, and his friends. So there you have it. And this is really one office that at this particular stage, and I've overly emphasized this, must be audited and inspected and investigated, because there are so many things that have sequestered, they have sold, and they have even, well, to quote, stolen, which need an accounting for. And all of this, actually, I've already done in many of this Rita Gadi Hour. And a lot of questions have also been brought out regarding this. I've also talked about former chairmen and commissioners of this Commission on Good Government and how important it is that an accounting and an auditing should really be undertaken. So you could see that over the past 4 years, we've practically touched on just about everything that has involved the accusations and the attacks against the Marcoses. But then, of course, on the other side, we also talked about the programs, the projects, all the things that they have done for the benefit of the Filipino people. We've talked about martial law on several episodes, likewise, why it was declared, what benefit it has given to the Filipino people. And of course, the need for this, especially since we must remember it is a legal act in our Constitution enshrined that in the event that the presidency is a threat to our government, then he can declare martial law. He can declare a portion or the entire country under martial law, suspend the writ of habeas corpus. So we also discussed the Supreme Court decision regarding this, and then in the other aspects involving the declaration of martial law. So it is that in all of this, I am summarizing So you really have to bear with me listening, because it's like putting together what we have talked about for the past 4 years. And as I've said, we are closing with that summary, but without closure, because all of these issues still comes out every once in a while. They still surface. And even though we've already answered them, they will still be coming out even in the future. So when I say that I'm closing my program, Rita Gadi's Hour, that I've discussed extensively 1965 up to 1986 up to the present, there is still not a definite closure as far as the issues against the Marcoses are concerned. In fact, you already had the other side of EDSA's story, what happened in the 72 hours in Malacanang through the maids who were there, and through, of course, the witnesses, which is the family itself, Senator Amy Marcos, who actually was part of this production. So in spite of that, you still have a lot of criticism, a lot of all of these virulent attacks against them. And that's why I say it is still without closure. But I'm closing the program. And so if anyone would like to ask again what happened there or what happened there, etc. and all, then you could always go back to the YouTube. All of it is stored there, in spite of the fact that several opposition social media networks have tried to print in front of my face that I'm a liar or that it is false. The YouTube has the entire episodes, and you could source it from there. You have it there in their archives. So it is that I also have to make it very clear that insofar as the Rita Gadi Hour is concerned, I have not received a single cent for it. I am not paid for it. Nobody has asked me to talk about the Marcoses. I did it on my own. I did it on my own when Sir Butch Valdez, who heads the Save the Nation movement of the Katipunan and Democratico Filipino, requested or asked me if I wanted to have an hour in the KDP channel. And so I said, thank you very much. And I accepted. And so I thought of what it is that I would be talking about. And that is why I came with the idea on my own to talk about the Marcoses. What I knew from 1965 regarding their life, both as officials, as I said, personally, politically, and professionally. So those were the basis of how I talked about them. And then from 1986 until the present, including the trial in New York City, including the many other events that I have witnessed, like the grand jury on the nuclear plant when they had Mrs. Marcos also testifying there. So all of this actually was on my own volition. Nobody asked me to talk about them. Nobody initiated any of the programs that I am discussing. I think about this, I do my research, I have my documents, I read through them before I face you, before I open the Rita Gadi Hour. So you could be very much assured that everything that I have said there are based on personal knowledge, professional knowledge, political knowledge, and are actually the facts and the truth. I've said this 100 times. The truth is very easy to tell. It is only evil that complicates. So it is that I repeat, I am not being paid for this Rita Gadi Hour. I do not receive a single cent for it. I am doing it on my own voluntarily. Not any member of the Marcos family. The old President Marcos has already died in 1989, long before I started this program. Every once in a while, Mrs. Marcos would call up if she watches an episode, and she would ask me about it. Her memory is still very good. So she would ask me, sino yung Andres Bautista na yan? Apparently, either she wants to forget him completely, or she was trying to get more information from me. So that's exactly the time when she would ask, sino yun? Na, because I talked about Andres Bautista when he was interviewed in the States. He's still there, actually, because there was something wrong with what he said in that interview. And he said that his vault was opened, his documents, his laptop, etc., were all ransacked by Mrs. Marcos, etc. It's not true. It's his wife, actually. And all of you know this, because his wife came out publicly on television and on radio and in print that she was running after her husband, who had millions of deposits in some rural bank in some remote town out there. etc. So I don't want to repeat that. But that was one incident when Mrs. Marcos called and asked, sino ba yan si Andres Bautista? Not remembering that he was actually there at her residence for a dinner for some friends anyway. So it is that other than her, as I've said, nobody has ever commented or asked from the Marcos family that I do this or that I do that. This is purely on my own and on my own research. And as I've said, on my own volition. And gladly, I have been doing this, as perhaps you would have noticed how over the past episodes, that's exactly how I try to feel about it. They say that it's because I'm a Marcos loyalist. I'm a loyalist to the truth. And this is a family that I have considered quite honorably and quite respectfully. So as I've said, if you'd like to go back to the archives on YouTube so that you could see where you could source again many of the questions that you've asked me also when you send messages. I just want to let you know how huge the viewership is of your program, the Rita Gadi Hours. So when we were beginning to explain the unexplainable, meaning that a lot of people perhaps do not understand, what is this PCGG, etc. and all, that's the title. I'm reading the titles of our episodes so that if you wish to go back and view them again, because as I've said, this is the last of our episodes. So kung may mga tanong pa kayo, dito nyo hanapin yan. Explaining the unexplainable. Diyan, marami tayong kinwento tungkol sa mga ayaw pag-usapan. Hindi nilalabas sa dyaryo. Sapagkat ayaw nila malaman natin ang katotohanan. We had 63,000 views. Yung ating true, good, and beautiful, of course, that's the Platonic Trinity that Mrs. Marcos always mentions whenever she has a project, whenever she is asked, how do you do this, how do you do that? Sabi niya, the true, the good, and the beautiful. We had something like 46,000 viewers. When we talked about, I'm trying to read my handwriting. When we talked about, what is this? The Reds, martial law, the Reds and treason, we had 53,000 views. When we talked about martial law, understanding martial law was the title. We had 60,000 to watch. That was only up to the time that I noted it down. Pero lumalaki pa yan pagka meron pang nanonood at pag meron pang nag-share. There is an episode entitled, What Have They Done to the Marcoses? Naku, ito yung nakakaiyak. What have they done to the Marcoses? Kung panoorin nyo ito ulit, makikita nyo na simula pa nang dumating sila sa hikam, anong pinagagawa ng mga Amerikano sa kanila. The treatment that they did all throughout, and then when they were in Honolulu, at lahat ng mga kaso na final nila. Do you know how many viewership we had? How many views rather? 444,000. Sabi, no? When we spoke about Imelda, the mother, we had 133,000 who watched. When we talked about, ano ba ito? The truth survives. You see, the truth survives. And that's the truth about the Marcoses. We had 124,000 views. When we talked about where have we been, tayo yon. Where have we been? Saan tayo nanggaling? From 1986 up to the present, ano bang nangyari sa atin? We had 91,000 views. When we talked about the presence of the past, we had something like 53,000. When we talked about EDSA, the other side of EDSA, we had 218,000 views. When we talked about America and the cases that they filed, America and the cases they filed against the Marcoses, we had 65,000 who watched us. We talked about essential truths, we had 56,000. When we talked about Russia, China, America, and all those countries, big countries that are now in conflict with each other, we had 97,000 that viewed our program. When we spoke about President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and the campaign that he conducted, and the title of our program was "A Multitude Arising," we had something like 150,000 that viewed that. One of our episodes, which was titled, ano ba ito? My goodness, my own handwriting, I cannot read. Oh, we talked about the paper trail, which was all of those documents that presented in the New York trial. We had 201,000 that viewed this. And then when we talked about retribution and atonement, with something like 34,869. When we talked about where is the money, yan, nagnakaw daw si Marcos, so where is the money? We had 182,990. When we had an episode looking back to the future, ito na yung mga projects nila, we had 46,000. And so many other episodes, really. When we talked about father and son, Marcos, the title of our program then was "The Son is the Father of the Man." We had something like 230,000 viewership. When we spoke about Ferdinand Marcos Jr. as president, the title of our program was "To Be on Top of Destiny." We had 33,624. And then when we spoke about the Marcos loyalists, together with Ms. Cherico Barubias, who was really the one who was organizing all of this, with 59,811 that viewed this. When we spoke of Imelda again, every time we speak of her, you see how many are actually watching, 48,842. We spoke about Hubris. This is the book that we wrote in coordination with General Quintanar and Mr. Dalisay, and this is last July, actually. We had 86,446. And one of our later episodes, when we talked about Imelda, the mother, we had 137,000. Wow. So you see how it is. Now, every time we talked about Mrs. Marcos, ang dami-dami talaga. I think I'm trying to look at how many actually watched, because I also had an episode on her birthday. So let me see where that is written, because that is something really that was quite boggling. Sana ba yun? Oh yes, when we talked about her birthday, we had over 100,000 viewers. That was her 93rd birthday. That was when we talked about Malacanang, how I finally was able to enter Malacanang on her birthday 36 years after. So you see how it is that over the past 4 years that we have been talking over the Rita Gadi Hour, and all of you listening, wherever you're located throughout the world, just remember that the time has come that I have to close my program, your program, the Rita Gadi Hour, because I have exhausted practically just about the best and the brightest of all of those episodes during the time of President and Mrs. Marcos, 20 years after, from 86 up to the present, the many other episodes that were never written about, never talked about, never published. We also touched on them as best as we could, so that we could be able to share with you both the sadness and the joyous moments. All of this really will come to a treasure of memories. I must have lived 100 years for all of this, if you will have to have a reckoning from 1965. And though it may, I feel a little nostalgic even having to say that I'm closing the Rita Gadi hour today. But as I've said, anytime you wish to have any questions, you could always message me, or you could interview me somehow, somewhere. You would find ways to do this. And as I've said, when we close, but it is without closure, and that is because even up to this time that we already have a President Marcos in Malacanang, there are still so many attacks that are being raised against the family. And there can not be a closure unless they would actually be able to, come to terms with just one word, and that is the truth. And the truth, as I've said, is something that is so important in our lives, especially since we have reached the stage when that is what is of greatest value. Our loyalty, as we say, is really a long journey. And we do this so that in many ways we do not lose the path towards the truth. I got a quote here, and sometimes it's difficult to really understand it, but I think it has to be read. I will remember that time was like never and like always. So we go there where nothing is waiting, and we find everything waiting there for us. I had a poem which was written many years ago. I will try to change some words just so as I could close the Rita Gadi hour with these words. Indulge me for this. From among the presents of our past, I would always be there waiting for you so that we could come out into the future. I'm sorry, but I think you lost my video. Okay, I'm sorry. So let me go back to these lines. From among the presents of our past, I would be waiting for you to come out of the future so that we could yield ourselves to every event as it passes before our eyes today or before our memories. Because they would remain for us alone. Without these episodes that I have gone through over the past so many years, there is one thing that we must remember: truth, that blissful platform of what is truthful. That is still perhaps what everybody would cry out for. And in the many episodes that we have had, we answered the longing for that truth. We have lifted many people out of apathy, out of disbelief, out of doubt. And in those darkened hours where we were fed other things, we knew or we understood the first words that we have spoken have always been with the truth. And so it is that we should not forget the world outside and the world inside of us. And I would carry you through all of this in my memory. Every time we come with an episode, remember that you would believe the radiance of the truth always, and that you would always be able to promise each other and embrace that one day all of the presences that we have actually acknowledged and respected. And so, out of the wilderness of the many things that I have said for the past 4 years, listen gently to the memories of my words. Thank you very much to all of you all over the world and throughout our country who have watched us, shared our episodes, and who have acknowledged many of the things that we have talked about. Thank you very much to our Lord who has given us this gift of being able to share with all of you the most important element of our lives, the truth. This has been your 4 years of the Rita Gadi Hour. Thank you for having joined me.
Pam pam